So Liz Truss is obviously Prime Minister. This will be the third segment that I start with that fucking sentence, and it doesn't become any more easy to be able to internalize, no matter how many times I say it. But regardless, now one of the things that's being said quite a lot by people in the kind of media landscape at the moment, right, is she is the third woman to hold the office of Prime Minister. This was a question that we saw in PMQs earlier from Theresa May, and this is she's the third woman who has become Prime Minister who is a member of the Conservative Party. They've all been Tories, right? And people keep saying, hang on a minute, hang on a minute. Why have Labour they've not even had a woman prime minister. They've not even had a woman leader of the lead the party. At least not not as proper leader rather than an interim period. Why is it the left wing is so misogynistic? Now, obviously this is nonsense, right? Now, the first thing to talk about with regards to this is the idea that the public perception, right? People have kind of frozen this woke versus anti-woke thing into kind of public consciousness, but really that's kind of been going on for a very long time, where there's always different standards for people depending on which side of the political aisle they're on, right? So when people have this expectation of people on the right who lean right in politics to be in some way bigoted or some way not in favor of minorities or something like that, they have low expectations, right? Yet the people on the left, the progressives, such so to speak, right, are always the people who talk about things like women in politics and the issues of minorities. So they have this expectation that they will therefore want to fit some kind of diversity quota, which is this kind of thing that gets thrust upon progressives quite a lot of the time. Now, what this does mean is that in the public perception is that if a conservative PM is a woman, it's because it proves that they're now not bigoted. That they don't somehow hate marginalized people despite all of their policies literally doing exactly that. But if someone on the left would do the same thing, it proves that they're just woke virtue signalers who are trying to score diversity points. Now, the second thing as well is what this really does is speak to the way in which the liberal left, right, liberal, or not even the left, just liberals, right, have just kind of ruined discourse because they've kind of adopted the ideas of intersectionality, right, but they've just completely missed out class. Now, Eddie Tempsey caught a lot of flack. Now, I don't agree with all of his statements around his kind of separation between people of color and working class people as if these somehow two separate entities based on skin color when they're both part of the same class, right? But at the core his message was is that the kind of the Labour establishment, the Liberals that became in charge of Labour, kind of post 1980s, like people like Blair and Brown and all of the Blairites that came afterwards, they've kind of thought that if they try to buy into the middle class Liberal vote, they know that they can rely on the people of colour vote to be able, because why would they fucking vote for the Tories? Because the Tories fucking hate people of colour, and they always have done. At least on a structural level, even not on a like an explicit individual level. But they made this leap of electoral calculus that they can stop worrying about working class people, and this same idea, the same ideology, has then further permeated into the general kind of public consensus about how we discuss things like intersectionality, where it's all about these different kind of new demographic groups, right? But they've conveniently left class out of it because it's scary Marxism or whatever, but also because Tony Blair and Gordon Brown's kind of electoral platform, but Tony Blair successfully tried to weaponize and Gordon Brown failed to weaponize, was liberals plus other minorities, both working and middle class, whilst forgetting about class politics because the old kind of obsessed with with class politics, class war style labor policy platform was apparently not going to get them anywhere, especially not in the kind of the 90s and 2000s economic quote unquote boom period. Again, it happened with the Democrats in 2016, 100%, where it was all about girl boss Hillary rather than about whether or not they had any actual policies that be able to get people. So they had the minority there, but they didn't talk about all the other intersectional areas. Or the Democrats were still bad about other minorities' rights back then. But I digress. But the issue is this electoral coalition that they put together, because they were trying to change the image of Labour Party to not be about class war anymore, meant that liberals and some, actually, to be fair, some people who would call themselves to be on the left as well, just conveniently forgot about class politics. There was a huge time period where any amount of class politics was kind of forbidden in British political discourse, right? And you would, as we are seeing, as people are trying to do now, people being completely disregarded as being Marxists, right? Do you remember when Richard Madeley asked Mick Lynch, "Are you a Marxist?" Like in days of yore, that would just be like this claim that would have excluded people from politics forever, and they would no longer have some kind of political platform. But now things have changed again, and the excess of neoliberalism have come full circle. Now we're in the bust period. Suddenly, Marxism as a kind of hegemonic political ideology is suddenly gaining traction, at least amongst young people, as we see the class divides get worse and worse over neoliberalism, and the kind of period where this middle class vote could be relied upon by the liberal left. That's kind of withered away. Obviously, the house prices have continued increasing, but they've just moved as they've gained asset wealth. They've then moved to the Conservatives. It's important to point out that this continually kind of burgeoning boomer middle class that exists, that Labour tapped into in 2000s, Conservatives are tapping into now. These people explicitly exist because of Thatcher's economic policy, right? She took a huge cohort of people and then gifted them the sell-off of the private sector that they then be able to gain in financial assets due to the over-financialization of the economy during the 1980s and the early 90s, and then how that was not changed by Blair, right? And even Blair made it even worse by not building enough council properties to be able to deal with the issues with right to buy. So this huge cohort of new asset wealth, rich middle class people were suddenly the people who had to be you had to win this particular group, this particular demographic of people to be able to win an election. And Tony Blair explicitly tried to play into that. And so now we have no class politics in the Labour movement anymore. We did for a very long time. This getting a resurgence now. And this is the consequence, right? This is why we have neoliberal kind of girl boss politics, where it doesn't actually matter about the effective utility of any of the policy proposals, because any idea of class politics or emancipatory politics died with Blair and Brown. It is all about just the representation and the people being there because they are part of the minority group that, you needs the representation. And representation is good. Don't get me wrong. Don't knock representation for people of color, minority groups. But is it worthy representation for people of color if the people of color in government are using their power to then drown other people of color in the channel? I don't really think so, right? That's the effective utility of these policies, which is why not only do you need an intersectional analysis that relies on politics against misogyny, against racism, against homophobia and transphobia, etc., 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 you also need things that are explicitly class-based, right? It's liberal feminism and things like that that have got us to the position where we will girl boss over Liz Truss and Margaret Thatcher and Theresa May for just being women in people in places of power and not actually looking at the effective utility of the policies that they espouse. To be fair, though, looking at the cabinet, right? People keep saying this is the most ethnically diverse cabinet of all time. That's true. That is true. Are there more white men than ethnic minorities women combined in the cabinet? That's also true. It's also funny that there are actually more people of colour in the cabinet than there are in the Conservative Party who aren't in the cabinet. Now that they've put Ranil Jayawardena, Alok Sharma, and Kemi Badenoch fully into the cabinet now as well. There are actually more people who are now in the cabinet who are people of colour than there are in the rest of the party who aren't, which is funny, to say the least, right? So, and are they still using their power, the position of power that they're in, to be able to disenfranchise ethnic minorities? Yes, they are. They are explicitly doing that moving forward, right? Like they said, like Liz Truss said, she would continue with the fucking Rwanda plan, which is just an explicitly racist policy because it only targets brown people. Like, what else can you call that other than racist? Like, that's the point of inflection, really, isn't it? Now, with regards to the actual appointments, they're also overwhelmingly, as JDM points out, privately educated, right? We've completely missed because, like, oh, look how ethnically diverse they are, which is fundamentally a good thing, right? I think it is genuinely good that there are more non-white people in the cabinet than there've ever been before. That is, I'm not saying that is not a good thing, because it absolutely 100% is. They may be bad people, right? But the kind of in a vacuum, the idea that people are seen to be more happy looking at a cabinet full of people who aren't white, I guess that's an improvement on what it was previously. But more people in the cabinet went to private school than went to comprehensive and grammar schools combined, right? These are not your everyday ethnic minorities or people or any member of the cabinet, right? It doesn't matter whether they're ethnic minority, whether they're a woman, whether they're a man, whether they're white, whether they're cis, whether they're whether they're straight, right? Doesn't matter, because all of these people have completely different worldviews and realities, and ideological precepts and ideas of actual values and the kind of policies that they want to implement and the effective utility of doing so, then what would actually benefit any of the minorities that they claim to represent by being there? Because representation is only one step of the way, right? Again, and I go back to it, like they'll still be drowning minorities in the channel at the end of the day, right? They'll still be supporting the Metropolitan Police, despite the fact that they continue to engage in, not just the Metropolitan Police, but the police around the country, engage in huge amounts of misogyny. Like, you know, I'm not going to bring up the 40% statistic, but there's been even more stories of abuse of women amongst the police force, right? And yet, there's like, we need to have more police on the ground, right? Rather than, and then the big problem with the police is they're too woke. They're busy dancing at pride parades and painting LGBTQ flags on their vans, which obviously is fucking performative shit that none of us care about. It's just fucking rainbow capitalism at the end of the day, right? But they hate it because they believe that it's too, because that it's too nice to minorities, right? It's too nice to minorities, and they're not going to actually talk about the real world issues that the police force we have to deal with. And they're continually happy to sell bombs to Saudi Arabia to kill people in Yemen, to support the colonialist project in Israel that deals with a kind of apartheid state over the Palestinians, right? A bunch of follows and the raid from Lonabogs. Thank you very much. Valhalla Video, The Revenant Zero, and Shang Yang Gang, thank you very much for the follows. Welcome to the No Justice stream. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope there was a good stream from Lonabox there. I guess I have to continue the stream a little bit longer than I was expecting to. But yeah, like, representation is only a part of the pie. There's representation will only get you so far when all of the policies that they espouse are not in any way of benefit to actual members of these minority groups at the basic structural level. And the liberals are somewhat to blame for this by completely buying into the kind of neoliberal girl boss paradigm of if there is a person in power who is part of a minority, that is just good because it is one of them, rather than because they actually put policy in place that makes life better for these particular minorities. So yeah, as for the actual cabinet members, like, is Kwasi Kwarteng a better chancellor than Rishi Sunak? I probably don't think so. Like, it was Kwasi Kwarteng who put forward the bill that was going to, as business secretary, that was going to stop public sector union, or to allow the public sector to be able to hire agency workers to be able to strike break, right? So he's pretty bad as already as it is. But him and Rishi, they're just both as bad as each other at this point, really, to be honest. I'm not sure if Kwasi Kwarteng is married to a hugely wealthy billionaire coming out of the petrochemical industry, but he's already done a lot of bad shit. James Cleverly's foreign secretary, probably not as bad as Liz Truss, but again, she now has an even higher position, so that's pretty bad. The worst pick of all of them, almost certainly, is fucking Suella Braverman. God, the idea that we could get theoretically someone worse than Priti Patel or just as bad doesn't even bear thinking about. I think they picked possibly the only person who could have been just as bad as Priti Patel. Again, probably almost certainly going to continue with the racist Rwanda plan. Going to continue with trying to essentially make sure that more people drown in the channel. And also somebody who has explicitly gone on record, like, things are fucking scary for trans people at the moment. Considering that now we have a person in position of Home Secretary who explicitly lies about equalities law, has said that she wants to be able to get rid of things protecting transgender people in the Equality Act of 2010, right? And then also, essentially saying that, misinterpreting the law that she said that she as Attorney General, to say that schools should be given the right to be able to refuse to treat trans people with respect. Like, her as Home Secretary is fucking terrifying for trans people. Like, I've seen people talking on Twitter about what's people's exit plans as trans people from the UK. Like, what the fuck are you gonna do? Kemi Badenoch is International Trade Secretary, which is basically a meaningless position at this point, really, but you don't need to balance the rights of the minority with those of the majority. That's incredibly terrifying as a statement that she's going to make. Like, Kemi Badenoch is incredibly bad, and she is one of the furthest right of the people that's there. But the International Trade Secretary is not exactly a high-ranking position. I was expecting her to get a bigger one. Considering that it was Kemi Badenoch's base at the start, who then switched to Liz Truss to basically put Penny Mordaunt to the post to get into the top two. Like, the fact that she's been given a pretty low down job as international trade secretary, I think is, I mean, I'm glad. I'm glad that she's not in a higher up position. But oh yeah, like Zahawi, was he got appointed as Minister for Equalities, right? Despite saying the shit that you literally trying to demonize trans people back, not even as education secretary in March, April, but also during his bid to be leader as well. Talking about we're talking about things like protecting the definition of woman or some shit like that. Yeah, the guy who's an investigation by HMRC. That's why he's been made Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster again, because it's not a real position really, in comparison to his position that he did have previously as interim Chancellor. But the thing is, he's also the guy who supports the Rwanda plan. He is an Afghan Kurd, right? No, sorry, not Afghan Kurd. He's an Iraqi Kurd, sorry, who got displaced because of the war in Iraq, and now he's trying to say that. Sorry, he is an Afghan Kurd, sorry. He was an Afghan Kurd, sorry, who was displaced by, the things that were happening due to interventionism in Afghanistan, and is now the one who's supporting the plan that's going to try and get people trying to escape the Middle East to get to the UK to be able to start up a new life for themselves. He's trying to fly them out to fucking Rwanda. It's crazy shit. Absolutely crazy shit. But they made him Minister for Equalities and then scrapped the position for Minister for Equalities. I mean, I don't really know much about anybody. I think Kit Molehouse, Education Secretary. I'm sure he's going to be bad. Well, yeah, I mean, like Kemi Badenoch and Liz Truss as people from when they were in both in the qualities department. I think Badenoch and Truss in their respective positions deliberately tried to hamstring the FCA from trying to implement a trans-inclusive policy. They deliberately tried to hamstring that by essentially just giving them an executive veto over them trying to be able to implement it. Yeah, MOG for business and energy. We literally have a fucking, like, an actual fucking, like, someone who's quantum leapt from Victorian England to be in charge of an energy transition, considering the issues that we have currently, where the Conservative Party are basically in the pocket of the petrochemical industry, right? Like, as we were talking about on the stream earlier, where Liz Truss literally worked at Shell previously. I think loads of people here have worked in the petrochemical industry. Didn't yeah, Zahawi worked in the petrochemical industry too. I think he worked for BP. And we have him in charge of that. It's absolutely fucking terrifying. Therese Coffey's as anti-abortion and anti-gay marriage, and she's in the position of health secretary and deputy prime minister. Like, there are definitely some positions here that are way, way worse than they were previously. Yep, Truss was the one who appointed, like, who was the fucking... Oh, I can't remember the person who's currently the head of the HRC, but yeah, the reason why the HRC are so turfy is because of Liz Truss, yeah. I don't know. I have no idea about Jacob Rees-Mogg's investment portfolio, so I couldn't comment on that, Zeode, but I wouldn't be surprised if huge amounts of these people had shares in the petrochemical industry. Yeah, Baroness Nicholson, fucking hell. Wow, Michelle Donlan's got a real fucking downgrade. I mean, at least there's no Nadine Dorries. Like, it could have been worse, right? It could have been worse than this, in that she tried to appoint Nadine Dorries, she tried to appoint Ian Duncan Smith, and both of them turned it down. Imagine being so right wing. Imagine being so right wing that even Nadine Dorries and even IDS the Butcher don't want to be in your cabinet. How embarrassing. Dress's top economic advisors are from the Taxpayers Alliance and the Institute for Economic Affairs and Policy Exchange. Yeah, absolutely fine. Like far right ANCAP think tank shit. Yeah, it's absolutely. But then again, these are the same economic advisors that have advised economic policy for ages. Like, the person who wrote Boris Johnson's manifesto was Robert Colville from the Centre for Political Studies, which literally was a think tank created by Margaret Thatcher. So yeah, I don't think England's ever going to become rapture. They got to, as we were talking previously, right? the Conservatives know that British people do not agree with their economic orthodoxy. They understand that the British people do actually expect the government to at least do some stuff, despite how the government doing stuff is indeed socialism, right? Like they do genuinely believe the Conservatives do know they cannot do their own actual ideological goals. Um, Without incurring the wrath of the British population. I mean, they might try and do it on the understanding that they're not going to win the next general election, but this is why things like free ports and charter cities get so much press, because they can ostensibly be used to undermine workers' rights without explicitly removing everyone's workers' rights and turning people against them. So I don't think they'll actually turn into Rapture. I mean, we've seen the heel turn with regards to energy bills, where she's like, well, "I'm happy to borrow loads of money and inflate, the overall budget deficit and the overall public debt, because we don't actually really care about reducing the deficit. We only care about it when we can use it as a bludgeoning point to be able to shrink the size of the state. But people don't actually like the general British public are way to the left of the conservative economic orthodoxy, at least nowadays. I think most people actually probably agree with the economic orthodoxy of the kind of the pre-Thatcher era conservative governments, people like Ted Heath, etc. They more probably are in line with that because they agree a lot with social policy as well, because a lot of cultural conservatives, even if there are not a lot of economic conservatives in the UK. Oh, we had Pedro. We had Pedro from Cozy TV. Has had a word, CEOs. But I don't think they're going to become Rapture, because they will just end up getting they'll just end up getting trounced in the next election, right? Because the British public don't like that. They've just got to try and find enough ways to try and implement some policies that only affect certain people, like free ports, as well as also doing things that are so far above everybody else that people don't really notice the effects until it's too late. Things like, the EHRC or whatever. And trying to change things, tinker around the edges to make things that little bit more libertarian without outright massively changing huge sectors of the economy. So, I don't think that really will happen in general. That's one thing they might do. Like, if they do leave the EHRC, they're using things like Rwanda as a proxy to try and use it to be able to curtail workers' rights. I can only assume that would be what they would be theoretically trying to do. The British Bill of Rights is getting dropped, though, but I think they're not dropped because they want to get rid of the policy, but dropped because they want to rewrite the policy. I think that's the kind of line that they're going with, as far as I'm aware. But also because Dominic Raab kind of rushed it through because he's a fucking clown. I think that's more of the real issue. I wouldn't be surprised if she did. I wouldn't be surprised if Truss was interfere with the rent caps bill as well in Scotland. Hey, thank you for the follow, Johnny Gonsoir. Welcome to the Digestion Stream. Hope you're doing well. Oh, she's worse than Boris. Like, she absolutely is worse than Boris, right? Boris may be scandalous, but he's not like an ideological kind of pile driver trying to drive through some, like, as many libertarian reforms as he can. Like, I genuinely believe Boris Johnson really only cared about power. I think we kind of got the kind of the Cameron Osborne kind of vibes from Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, and then Rishi Sunak and George Osborne were kind of principled neoliberals in their own right, and Johnson and Cameron just really cared about power and would do anything to keep it. What they're floating, Valhalla Vidya, is they're floating the idea of a referendum on independence where the whole of the United Kingdom get a vote and they have to get over 50% of the entirety of the United Kingdom, which is fucking hilarious, and very Tory thing to do. Hey, thank you for the follow, linearly relied. Welcome to the Justice Stream. Hope you're doing well. A lot of people saying though should pick up the Magna Carta instead of the rights, not having a meltdown. Yeah, almost certainly could backfire for Halifax. I mean, it would be funny. They're trying to this idea. I mean, obviously, people were saying on stream yesterday that this idea of kind of the one nation Tory party is dead. Because they've kind of killed it. It's become like the English National Party. It was Kevin Logan I was speaking with yesterday who was saying that. Which is kind of true, really, in the age of Boris Johnson, where they don't have to care about Good Friday Agreement, and they're explicitly trying to push away other countries and make them more isolationist. Like I will look at the polls the day before Scottish independence, and I will vote whichever one polls highest, because I'll try and be able to, as much as I can, reflect the will of the Scottish people to be able to self-determine. I think that's probably the best way of doing it. Like, I don't know. I just want them to, if they do become independent, I want the SNP to immediately nationalise all of the oil and gas fields in the North Sea that are technically part of Scottish waters. That'd be funny. In general, I do think this cabinet is like, it's different shades of shit as the previous one, but some things are much worse. But it's kind of almost continuity Boris right at this point, right? There's so many people here who are part of the kind of the Boris cadre of people, the only people who've really kind of been promoted outside of that, who are kind of big names, are people like Kit Morehouse and Penny Mordaunt. So it's bad. The people are bad. The policies can be bad, and also the fact that it's got more minorities in it is good in abstract, but not going to lead to any actual change that makes lives of minorities better, which is peak neoliberal id poll, and nothing to do with any actual kind of structural change that's going to benefit minorities as a whole.